Coming to, I'm sorry for the issues. So coming to the natural disaster mitigation, we have seen earthquakes, then we have landslides, floods, and sometimes these are connected, like during heavy rains, we have seen in Kerala, we have a lot of landslide issues. Then another is land subsidence, actually. So there are different ways in which it can happen. Like one is whenever we pump a lot of groundwater, when the stresses within the soil increase, there will be settlement. So this may happen over a large area. Then there are sinkholes, especially in limestone terrains. We know, like limestone, it is soluble in water. Then in the underground, large cavities are formed, and when this become large, then the ground may collapse, actually, affecting roads and buildings, etc. Then another issue, recently we are becoming more aware in Kerala, is the soil piping, because this happens in mostly lateritic kind of formations. When the groundwater flows, it carries away the fine soil particles. So there are underground cavities. So gradually this may become larger and larger. Then when the thickness of soil above this cavity is less, it may collapse, actually. So many areas this is happening like that. Then coastal erosion, like we know, like many places like Chellanam, like all over the Kerala coast, we have severe coastal erosion. Like people are losing their houses. Every time they have to vacate their houses and move to different place, like that. So a serious issue we are facing. Another important area is expansive soils. Like this is not a disaster like floods or earthquake or landslides. Like people don't die, but this happens in every year like that. So in the US, they did a survey like many years back. So they evaluated the various natural disasters and which causes the maximum type of damage. So in terms of economic damage, that means the money which we have to spend in repair and rehabilitation. So the number one cause was termites. Because in US, we have a lot of wooden houses and structures. So termite causes a lot of damage. The second cause was expansive soils. So we know these soils, like we have black cotton soils in India, like which during summer it shrinks and during monsoon it swells. So the roads and light buildings, they undergo alternate even settlement like that. So it was estimated that the damage due to expansive soils is more than the combined damage due to earthquakes, floods, and all cyclones put together like that. So only like people don't die, but a lot of damage happens, actually, mainly economic damage. So this was the ground subsidence due to groundwater lowering I was mentioning. Like this is a problem in Mexico City. So here the ground conditions are like there is a very thick layer of soft soil, like clay, like we have in Cochin, like 30-40 meter thick layer of soft clay. Below that it is dense sand, actually. So most of the heavier structures, they are supported on end-bearing piles. These end-bearing piles go through the soft soil to a depth of say 40 or 50 meters below the ground level and terminated in this dense sand stratum. And they depend on groundwater, actually. So there are a lot of bore wells from which a lot of groundwater is pumped. So the water level goes down, actually. So the piezometric head goes down. So the effective stresses in the soil increase. So under this increased stress, the soil consolidates. So over a period of time, there is a lot of ground. So original ground level was here. So due to the groundwater lowering, it undergoes settle. So the ground is now here, actually. But since the buildings are resting on end-bearing piles, the buildings don't settle, actually, but the ground settles. So this is a interesting reversal. See, normally what happens, the buildings settle, the ground remains as it is, like that. But here it is reverse, actually. So we have this structure, like a monument, which is constructed almost 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, here was the ground level, actually, like that. But now it has, the ground was settled somewhere like 2.4 meters actually. So it's as if the building has come out and the monument stayed as it is. The ground around has settled. This is due to regional subsidence due to groundwater withdrawal.
Hello. 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 I think some got this right. Hello.
Sir lost connection, it seems.
Yes, again I think maybe some mobile call or anything, something might be.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes.
Yeah. Which slide was it? Can you tell me? Like the last you could hear?
Yeah, last that settlement slide was over. And now
Okay.
the slides are not visible, I think.
Okay, I think I have to probably. This, I think, you would have seen this.
No, this one, no, sir.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry again for the connection issues. I don't know what's happening. So mainly the land subsidence. So here, like this was the monument, which is something like 100 years old. So 100 years ago, the ground level was here at this level, and presently it is at this level actually. So something like 2.4 meters, it has settled. Another building, like 1942, this was a situation. Like in 2016, this is like by almost this much, the ground has settled actually. Because the building is resting on end-bearing piles, the building doesn't settle. But due to the groundwater withdrawal, the ground settles actually. So this is a problem there. Like many other, like world over, this is an issue. Like when we pump too much groundwater, the ground settles. Then coming to the resources, like we have to get minerals and also energy like that. So the mining, the oil and gas drilling. Then nowadays we have another branch called energy geotechnics like that. So all these aspects, whenever we extract, then transportation of the minerals, storage, like waste disposal. So everywhere geotechnical engineering support will be required. So like the mining, we have like one example is open cast mining. That means we make a huge excavation in the ground, then we try to reach the minerals and extract it like that. And sometimes the topsoil, like it is not of any mineral value, so that has to be excavated and dumped somewhere like that. So in that process, we create what are known as overburden dumps. So stability of this, because these are all loosely dumped material, so stability becomes an issue, like the erosion control. Then earlier I mentioned about tailings dams. Like the tailings are the waste materials, like the rock has to be crushed into very fine particles. So from that, we recover the minerals. So the balance material is a waste. It has to be disposed of somewhere. So to store this, we create tailings dams. So stability of these tailing dams is an issue. Then in mining, we excavate a lot of materials. So this has to be transported actually. So they use very large dump trucks. So normally the heaviest trucks which we see on our roads may be like 30 tons or 40 tons like that. But these trucks, we can see the weight. This is the largest, the heaviest truck in the world. So the empty weight itself is like 360 tons. Then it can carry something like 450 tons of material. So total weight is 810 tons. Like, so you can imagine the kind of loads it imposes. And look at the tires actually. The diameter is something like 4 meters. You can see compared with the height of the person. Width is something like 1.5 meter. Then weight of a single tire is something like 5.4 tons. And look at the price. So here the challenge is to enable these trucks to move, so we have to create roads, what are known as haul roads actually, for the hauling the materials. So when we design, we can see that we need a very, very thick granular layer. I have seen sometimes we need something like 2 meter, 2.5 meter thick layer of aggregate to support the loads actually. Then of course, like offshore drilling platforms, it has its own challenges actually. It is subject to wind, wave, etc. A lot of forces, environmental loads. To design the foundations are very challenging. Like the offshore. First, we'll have to do the investigations, then the design, construction of the foundations, etc. are very challenging tasks. And coming to agriculture, there are many issues. Like one is the soil compaction. Like in civil engineering also, we have to compact the soil, but in agricultural engineering, compaction is not good, because compaction is basically increasing the density of soil. It may be caused by animals, it could be light tilling equipment or heavy agricultural machinery. So when the soils gets compacted, the air permeability reduces, then water infiltration reduces, then the plant root growth gets affected like that. So overall, the crop yield gets affected. So normally in agriculture, we don't want compaction. Then the movement of agricultural machinery plus the plowing, tilling operations, how the soil is cut, excavated, etc. So in the designing of that, again, soil mechanics principles can be made use of. Because earlier also we had a subject called soil science, where we study soil physics, soil chemistry, etc. But now, because soil mechanics has made a lot of advances, so these kind of principles are used by agricultural scientists also. And that was a brief overview of geotechnical engineering, just to show that it is not only, it's not just about foundations and retaining structures and slope stability. So nowadays there are a lot of areas into which geotechnical engineering has expanded. And another area which I have not mentioned is snow and ice mechanics. Sometimes we snow avalanches, etc. So these are the modeling, analysis, etc. We make use of soil mechanics principles. The second topic I want to cover is geosynthetics. So geosynthetics are basically a planar polymeric materials. It could be a synthetic polymer like polypropylene, polyethylene, polyester, etc. Or it could be a natural material like coir or jute. So whenever we use it in soil or civil engineering or construction related applications, we call it a geosynthetic actually. So the materials are polymers. So the polymer science is important. Then the manufacturing process, it is actually textile technology like knitting, weaving, even non-woven, plus plastic extrusion, etc. So these kind of processes are involved. But the application is in civil engineering. So this is a multidisciplinary field. And we have a lot of products actually. So I've just listed so every time. So sometimes new products keep coming out, like geotextiles, geogrids, geomembranes, geonets, then the geosynthetic layer barriers. So when we have different products together combined, we call it geocomposites, strips, etc. And geocells, again becoming more and more popular in India. Geoform, a lot of products are there like that. So coming to the geotextiles, these are basically fabrics. So it has got very fine openings through which water can pass through. It is pervious to water, but then the openings are so small that soil particles cannot pass through generally like that. Again, there are non-woven, there are woven, there are knitted geotextiles, various hydraulic properties, like tensile strengths. Because, for example, we have very high strength woven polyester with a tensile strength up to more than 1000 kilonewton per meter weight, like that. A huge range of products. Then geogrids, these are net or grid likes. They are fairly large apertures. So the main purpose is soil reinforcement or soil stabilization. So they need good tensile strength, good tensile stiffness. Again, there are different material, like for example, this is made of high density polyethylene. These are made of polypropylene, and these are made of polyester, like that. So again, different manufacturing process like punching and extruded. These are woven, these are knitted, like that. So different materials, different properties. Geomembranes are solid sheets actually, so they are impervious to water. So they are used as impervious liners, to prevent pollution or to store water, etc. Like that. Again, there are different materials like PVC, high density polyethylene, low density polyethylene. Again, like elastomeric, sometimes even bituminous actually membranes. Different varieties are there. Then we have smooth, textured, etc. Different thickness. Then geonets are used mainly for drainage applications. So we can see these again more or less net-like structures, but then the more than strength, the hydraulic conductivity or the transmissibility, that is the important property. So it conveys water within its plane, along its plane like that. These are called geonets. Then geosynthetic clay liners. So like we will have two layers of geotextiles. In between we have bentonite powder. So when the bentonite powder comes into contact with water, it swells. So it becomes a very impervious membrane actually. So these are substitutes for compacted clay liners. So wherever in a landfill lining system or like a water storage reservoir, wherever we want an impervious barrier, this can be used actually. So whereas a compacted clay liner has to be very thick, maybe something like a 0.6 meter or 1 meter thick, these are very thin of a few millimeters, like maybe 6 mm or 8 mm thick actually. But since bentonite has it is highly impervious, it is very, very effective as a liner. Then we can have geocomposites, like different products can be combined together. Like here, a biaxial geogrid is combined with a geotextile. Here, a geonet is combined with a geotextile. Similarly, here also, geonet is combined with a geotextile. So it can do multiple functions like that. Like a geogrid, it's good as a reinforcement, but a geotextile becomes a good separator and filter. So this can do multiple functions. Another interesting product is the prefabricated vertical drains. So earlier we have heard about sand drains. Suppose we want to accelerate the consolidation of clay. So we used to install sand drains actually. That means we drill a hole, borehole, and fill it with sand, so water can come out through that. So instead of that, we have this prefabricated vertical drains. Like we have a geonet inside, surrounded by a geotextile envelope like that. So this can be pushed into the ground actually. So very, very fast installation. And the properties are also very controlled, like it is a factory manufactured product. So we have the controlled filtration properties, etc. Then nowadays the geocells or the cellular confinement systems. So basically we have strips of like polyethylene. We can see this is a strips. So it is then strips are arranged parallelly and welded in a zigzag manner like that. So we get a honeycomb type of structure. So from the factory, it is fabricated and it is collapsed, packed in this way and sent to the site. Then the site, it can be spread out. It can be filled with aggregate, soil, or even concrete like that. So it can be used for load support, like for a road or a railway track. We can make retaining structures, or we can use for erosion protection. A very, very versatile product. Then we have geomats, which are used for erosion control. So these are called three-dimensional turf reinforcement mats. So this has got a three-dimensional structure like that. It has got probably a net with synthetic fibers actually like that. So whenever we need a durable product, like we can go for this synthetic, because coir and jute, etc. So they're very good, but they have a limited life. So sometimes for a ditch lining, so whenever certain like drainage ditches, it will be submerged through throughout the year like that, and where we need a much more stronger erosion control protection, we can go for this product. But for normal applications, like the coir geotextiles are preferred, coir or even jute, these are biodegradable. So this is put on the soil surface and vegetation is grown actually. So as the root system grows, even if this degrades and goes, there is no issue actually. Like the root system ensures erosion protection like that. So the coir, what it does is, it gives protection till the vegetation is established, and it enables denser growth of grass actually. So, but after a few years, this may decompose. It may degrade and disappear like that. But that is okay for erosion control. That is fine. Then the geosynthetics, like there are a lot of functions like separation, filtration, drainage, all these functions are there. So different applications, different functions are involved. For example, like if you are using in a pavement, below the aggregate base or a railway track, separation is important, filtration is important. Sometimes reinforcement is also important like that. But if you're making a reinforced soil structure, like for a retaining wall, reinforcement is the predominant mechanism. So depending on the application, different functions are important. So accordingly, we have to use the appropriate product. Then coming to the applications, like there are huge, almost all aspects of civil engineering, we have the applications, especially in roads, railways, transport. Like we can use it for subgrade stabilization. Wherever we have a soft soils, if you want to construct a road, we can put these materials. And nowadays, getting aggregate is a problem like that. So if you reinforce the aggregates, we can reduce the thickness of the aggregate layer. Or another important is sometimes we don't get good quality aggregates actually. But like if you want to use a poor quality aggregates, then probably we can use a geogrid or geocell. By reinforcing that, we can improve its performance. Then we can use it for the reinforcement of asphalt. So for that, normally we prefer fiberglass grids actually, because asphalt is a very brittle material. So we need a material which mobilizes tension at a very low strain. Then again, subsurface drainage, access roads, working platforms. Again, as I mentioned, mine haul roads, where heavy loads have to be supported. These are very useful. Then retaining structures, slopes, embankments. We have reinforced soil walls, slopes. Sometimes we have to build high embankments on very soft ground. So we have very techniques for that. And Gabion retaining walls, we are familiar. Nowadays, geocell retaining walls also becoming popular. Slope erosion control, subsurface drainage. So again, the hydraulics like erosion control, coastal protection. Like sometimes many of you have made about like geotextiles, bags and tubes like that. And canal lining with geomembranes, reservoir lining. Similarly, environmental like landfills is a big application. Like a lot of products are being used. Landfill capping, tailing dams. A lot of applications are there. So we will briefly look at some of the applications. Like first, let us see the reinforced soil structures, which we use widely in India nowadays actually. So like I will try to explain the concept in a very simple way. Like all of us are familiar with mass gravity retaining walls, like simple made of masonry or plain cement concrete. So here the retaining structure has to resist the applied earth pressure like that. So the earth pressure in this active zone, the earth will apply horizontal force as well as overturning moment on this. So which it has to resist by its own weight actually. So it has to resist sliding along the base and it has to resist overturning like that. So the resistance comes from purely its weight actually. So this had to be really heavy like that. So beyond a height, it becomes uneconomical. That means if you want to construct a retaining wall which is 10 meter or 20 meter high, then the base width has to be something like 0.6 or 0.7 times the height. So this becomes very massive. So it will become uneconomical actually. So these are okay for small heights, say up to 3 meter, 4 meter, this is okay. But for higher heights, we have to think of a more economical option. So our basic idea is how do I reduce the volume of masonry or concrete actually. So basically what we have to do, basically we have to have sufficient weight to resist the earth pressure actually. So instead of making this weight with masonry or concrete, from this mass gravity, I have shown the RCC cantilever wall. Like this outline, this red outline is that of the mass gravity wall. And here we can see the RCC cantilever wall. So it has got a relatively thin stem and a base slab. So here what are we doing? See, I am taking advantage of the weight of soil on the base slab in resisting the applied earth pressure like that. So I am able to remove this much masonry or concrete like that. And instead of that, I am relying on the weight of the soil on the base slab to resist the earth pressure, to resist sliding and overturning. But in that process, what happens? Now my stem has become very thin. Similarly, base also very thin. and we know now tension will develop. So I have to reinforce it. So I have to put steel reinforcement in the stem and the base slab like that. But compared to the masonry wall, it becomes economical actually like that. Again, beyond a certain height, say for up to 7 meter, 8 meter, this is okay. But beyond that, again, this will become uneconomical because we need a lot of concrete and steel. So one option is we go for like counterfort. That is another option. But then again, that has limitations. So if you want to make it further economy, so again, I'm trying like how can I minimize the volume of concrete. So now what do? Let me take away. So instead of relying on the weight of this, so can I resist the earth pressure by the weight of this block of soil itself like that? So if the block is sufficiently wide, it has enough weight to resist the earth pressure that's sliding and overturning. But then this block of soil will not be stable actually. We know this type of wedge will fail actually. So what I do, like this red outline, it has shown the outline of the RCC cantilever wall. So I remove the entire base slab, entire bottom slab I remove. Then I take away most of the thickness of the stem. So I'll leave only a thin facing, like a thin, which may be like a 15 to 20 centimeter thickness only. So we know this will not be stable, like because this wedge will fall. So I have to reinforce the soil. Like. So this block of soil is reinforced internally with horizontal layers of geosynthetics. It could be geogrids or it could be geotextiles. So when I put a sufficient number of layers of reinforcement, this block becomes stable actually. So this wedge cannot fall, and this entire block becomes like a mass gravity wall. So instead of building a retaining wall from outside to support the soil, so we have internally reinforced the soil to make it stable like that. So this is the basic idea of reinforced soil wall. So the components, like we have a very thin facing, which could be small concrete blocks, it could be panels, we can have geocells, gabions, a lot of options are there. Then behind that, there will be a drainage layer. Then the soil will be reinforced with the geosynthetic reinforcement, which could be geogrids, geotextiles. And we need a good quality soil here, like for the reinforcement, because this entire structure, this entire zone becomes a reinforced soil structure like that. So some examples. So this is a structure which we designed in Delhi, like that, something like a 2008 or 2009. So here, like we did not have any concrete actually. The facing uses a welded steel wire mesh. Like, so we have the steel rods bent into a L shape and with the welded like that. So this becomes the facing. So in this much area, like stone is filled. So then we have this geogrid coming and with a wraparound like that, we have for the sufficient length. The stone is put over a width of something like a half a meter width like that. Behind that, it is soil. So with that, we have been able to construct a 15-meter high reinforced soil wall, which is about the angle is almost 85 degrees with the horizontal. Small invert batter is there for aesthetic reasons like that. So this is another structure, like a 46-meter high reinforced soil wall in USA. Of course, this is reinforced with actually metallic strips and designed by the Reinforced Earth Company like that. So we can imagine like if you try to build a RCC wall of 46-meter height, it will be very much impossible. So because of this new technology, we are able to build very tall reinforced soil structures. So these are actually 4 tiers actually, each is something like 10 meter. Then there is a small setback of 1 meter like that. Then another 10 meter, another setback of 1 meter like that you can see. So this is a reinforced soil structure which retains the runway for the Sikkim airport. Like Sikkim is a hilly area, so it's like a tabletop airport. So to get the runway length, they have to do a lot of cutting and filling. So this structure retains the fill actually, almost 74-meter high. It is not a vertical structure. The angle varies. Sometimes it is 60 degrees, 70 degrees like that. And with the gabion facing and the very high strength geogrid reinforcement like that. So you can imagine the kind of height. So And recently, I came to know there is another structure in India which is more than 100-meter high, which is for a hill road actually. Something like right now, I think that is something like the tallest retaining structure in the world. It is more than around 104-meter high. That's what I heard. I don't have a photograph of that. I just came to know recently. So we can also have slopes actually. So because with the reinforcement, we can have any face angle like 40 degrees, 60 degrees, 70 degree, any kind of angle we can design, any kind of angle, even any kind of height. So this is a 40-meter high reinforced soil slope for the Shillong bypass actually. Because basically this is a hill road. So when we want to widen actually, so we have to do a lot of filling actually. And if you go to a normal, normally normal embankment, we have a 2 horizontal, 1 vertical slope, but it will require a lot of area actually. So 40-meter high means we need 80-meter space horizontally and a lot of fill material also. With this reinforcement, so we are able to reduce the footprint actually and the volume of fill material also. Like we have to remember, like maybe 20 years back, soil was available, like it was plenty, it was cheap. Nowadays, we know in Kerala, if you want to get some earth, how difficult it is. Like even if you are willing to pay, you will not get it like that. So not only the land requirement, the fill volume also is a big constraint nowadays. So we have this excellent technology. So we have to we can actually reduce the land acquisition as well as the fill requirement. So these structures are very popular like that. And what we have to realize is like nowadays these reinforcements are manufactured in India. Like there are several companies, 4 or 5 companies manufacturing geogrids, geocells, geostrips. All the materials are being manufactured and these are very, very economical. Like sometimes we have the feeling that these are very fancy imported items. But over the last years, there are a lot of companies in India. The company which I used to work for, like TechFab India, they manufacture almost all the products like that. Then there are other companies like Strata, McCaffrey, like so we have to change our thinking. Nowadays, what happens? The soil has become very expensive material and very difficult to get, whereas it is easy to get this reinforcement. So we have to make it a practice wherever possible. Let us try to reduce the width, make the embankments more steeper, so that we save on the land as well as the fill material. Another important application is the landfills. So this shows a jarosite pond. So jarosite is a waste material which comes out during the manufacture of zinc actually. Like that. This is in Visakhapatnam. So they have constructed an embankment, something like a 10-meter high embankment, and created a pond actually. So inside this pond, the jarosite slurry will be stored actually, like that. So to construct this embankment, a lot of geosynthetics were used, as well as the lining system, because this jarosite is a hazardous waste. So like if it is stored on open ground, then when rain falls, the water will, leachates will pass into the ground and contaminate the groundwater like that. So it has to be stored in a sealed environment actually. The bottom we have to have a lining system. All around also we have to have a lining system. So if you look at the bottom lining system, this is a subgrade soil. Then there is a compacted clay liner, something like 0.6 meter thick. Then there is a sand cushion, then a geomembrane actually. This is a high density polyethylene geomembrane. Again, a sand layer. So basically, like this becomes like a drainage layer actually. So it is a 2 layers are there, 2 impervious layers are there. First is a compacted clay liner, then is a geomembrane. So this is the primary leachate collection system, secondary leachate collection system. So see, normally what we try to do, we try to ensure a minimum head on this. So normally the leachate will be collected and pumped out and treated like that. So when there is more water head, more seepage through this like that. See, although the geomembrane is supposed to be impervious, sometimes what happens, there are small defects, like there could be small holes, and sometimes the joints may not be, if there are not proper, like that small leakage to that. So for that we have this secondary leachate and another secondary lining system like that. On the slopes actually, so here we can see, because this is a 45-degree slope, So on that, we cannot put a compacted clay liner because it will not be stable actually. So here, like we have two geomembranes actually, we can see like that. Liner system plus, like instead of sand also we are given like a geocomposite like that for the drainage layer, because sand also, like we cannot put a sand layer on a steep slope actually. So the lining system on the slope is entirely out of geosynthetics. Then another application is seawall, like because all over the coast this coastal erosion is a big problem, like due to the waves, like the coast is eroded like that. So this is like some slides of a seawall constructed at Uppada in Andhra Pradesh. This was something like 1.5 kilometers long seawall along the coast. It was constructed in 2010 by Garware Technical Fibers. So basically, the seawall was constructed of geotextile tubes actually. So these are long tubes made of geosynthetics or geotextiles. So the length could be something like 20 meters, even up to 100 meters long tubes are possible. Then what is normally done, we take normally the geotextile is available in a width of 5 meters like that. So if you take two such geotextile rolls and along the edges we joined it by stitching, then we get 5 meter plus 5 meter, the circumference becomes something like 10 meter like that. Then it will have filling ports like that. Then we pump in slurry like sand plus water mix, so which can be either dredged from the sea with a dredger, or we can sort of mix sand and water. There is an arrangement and pump into this geotextile tube under pressure. So the geotextile is pervious, so water will flow out actually. Then sand will get deposited in the tube. Then gradually it will become rice actually. But remember, like the circumference was 10 meters, so the theoretical diameter is something like 3.3, but you cannot construct like that. It will not be stable. So normally, like the height may be something like 0.6 times into the theoretical diameter. So it may be with a 10 meter circumference, we can get something like say, like a 1.8 or 2 meter height, we can get filled height like that. So then over that, so see normally the geotextile has a problem, like if it is exposed to solar lights, slowly it will degrade actually, or like it is susceptible to vandalism, fire, etc. And again, under wave impact, this may get damaged. So we have to put an armor layer. So this was with gabions, like these are actually gabions made of polypropylene rope actually. So we have gabions made of steel wire, something similar, made of polypropylene rope filled with boulders actually. So like something like if you have a gabion of say 2 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, it has a volume of 2 cubic meter. So it will have a weight of something like 3 tons, which is able to resist the wave impact actually like that. So if you put these stones directly on the geotextile, there will be abrasion actually. This will get damaged. So a transition layer of geotextile bags filled with sand is put in between the geotextile tube and the gabion like that. So sometimes there are layers actually, one tube, then another tube at the bottom, then the third tube at the top like that. So when you want the seawall to be of more height, over that the armor layer like that it was constructed. So it was constructed in 2010. It has survived like 6, 7, 8 years. It worked, but then when I looked at the status now, it is found it is sort of extensively damaged. Like I found this picture in Down to Earth magazine in 2019, because there were two big cyclones, Cyclone Vada in 2016 and Fani in 2009. A lot of wave attack, and it was damaged actually. See, here the problem is the polypropylene rope also gets degraded under UV, and sometimes what happens is when the wave come and hits actually, so the gabions as a whole, it has got sufficient weight, but inside the stones are small, so it may move under the wave impact, so which may abrade the ropes, and slowly the ropes may get degraded actually. So the durability is an issue like that. So like the geosynthetic tubes are used widely, but sometimes what happens, there are issues like Like we know, like in Chalanam also, sometimes they tried tubes with bags, with the mixer, sometimes it fails. The installation, proper design, everything is important actually. And timely maintenance also. So next topic, we'll look at some advances in pile foundations. So one is we look at the technique for board piles, which we call continuous flight auger. Then we'll look at the base grouting of board piles. Then some techniques in pile load testing. So first, continuous flight auger. So this is basically a method for installation of piles, because board piles, sometimes we have hand auger for the underream piles, or that is the manual auger. Then we have the DMC, that means we drop a chisel technique. So we have rotary boring technique, that means we use a small auger or a bucket with a hydraulic machine. So many techniques are available like that. So here the specialty is there is an auger which is continuous. Like suppose like we want to make a 30-meter deep pile, so we will have an auger which is all 30-meter length like that. Then with the machine, like we can suspend this on a crane and it is rotated actually, or we can have a hydraulic like a piling rig which is turned by hydraulic motors. Like basically the auger is rotated and pushed down into the soil. So the construction procedure is with the machine, the auger is turned, rotated, and slowly it advances into the soil. And it is pushed, like turned and rotated and pushed to the depth actually, to the required depth. So when it turns, the soil remains like, see normally, other cases, normally when we make an excavation, normal board piling, so either we need a casing, because we need to support the borehole actually. We are creating a borehole because we are removing soil from here. So either we need to use a temporary casing or something like a bentonite slurry to retain the excavation like that. But here, the auger is advancing, the soil is staying there actually. So there is no question of, there is no excavation as such. And there is no question of borehole stability. It is always stable like that. So once the depth is reached, then we slowly withdraw the auger. At the same time, so inside it is hollow actually. There is a cylindrical cavity inside. See, from the top, concrete is pumped actually. Just as the auger is withdrawn, the simultaneously concrete will be pumped actually. So at no stage there is excavation. That means there is no question of borehole side caving or like that. So either it is supported by the auger plus soil or it will be supported by the concrete actually. Then the concreting is done. See, after the concreting is done, immediately the reinforcement cage is inserted into that. So either sometimes through, if the length is short, it can be through the self-weight, or we can have a vibrating mechanism like that. So, and the concrete has to have high workability actually, because the reinforcement cage has to sink through the concrete actually. So we need a concrete with a very good workability like that. So coming to the diameter, commonly something like 400 millimeter, 900 millimeter, this is the most commonly used. But with very high capacity rigs, we can have diameter up to 1500 millimeter possible. Because normally, higher the diameter, we need the high torque. And again, please remember, like we are rotating the full length auger, like, sorry, which could be 20 meter or 30 meter like that. Whereas in normal construction, like in conventional rotary piling rigs, the auger or bucket is something like 1 meter depth only. So here we need much more torque actually. So that is why the restriction on diameter. Similarly, length, usually we can go up to 25 to 30 meters, but with high capacity rigs, up to like 45 to 50 meter length are also possible. Again, here we need more torque actually, that is the limitation. Then if you look at the auger, this is the design, like, and at the end there is a cutting arrangement is there depending on type of soil or rock. And here we can see the opening, because we need through which only the concrete comes. And normally, initially there has to be a plug actually. When the auger is being, when the drilling is carried out, we don't want soil to enter this cavity. So there will be a bottom plug there. When concreting is done under concrete pressure, this will be removed actually. This will be pushed down and concrete will flow out. So here, one issue with here is, like, see, normally we get optimum result with, see, normally when you rotate the auger, it should penetrate down actually. So when there is a compatibility between the number of rotations and advance, then there is a balance between the soil being moved actually. Soil should stay there like that. But if sometimes what happens, you are drilling through a soft soil, then you reach a hard stratum like that. And now when you turn, that auger doesn't penetrate that fast actually. So this part, it is rotating, but it is not advancing like that. So at that time, what happens? The soil from here, like, it will be pushed upwards like that to the ground. So more soil will be removed, and at that time there will be ground movements like that. So that is one we have to take care actually like that. Coming to the concrete, see, normally a cement, either like a cement sand grout or cement sand plus small aggregates, like sort of a baby metal kind of thing can be used. Then we need a very high workability. Typically, a slump of 200 plus is required, and typical compressive strength around 28 to 35 MPa is used. These are all normally international specifications like Europe or America. Then concrete is pumped under pressure like that. Because normal boat pile, we tremie, like concrete is done under gravity actually like that. But here we need concrete has to be pumped under pressure like that. Then concreting should start immediately upon completion of drilling. That means the augering we have done up to the required depth. So the auger has to be immediately removed. Otherwise, what happens? The soil may gain some strength. After that, we will not be able to bring up the auger like that. So as soon as you finish drilling, the auger has to be brought up, and immediately the concrete has to be started like that. Again, it has to be done without interruption. Then the reinforcing steel, like the longitudinal bars, then the spirals, and in between some stiffening rings also will be there. So it has to be, because the cage has to be inserted through the fluid concrete, so it has to be firmly tied actually. So sometimes it is better to weld it, like as long as we use weldable reinforcing bars actually, like that. See, normally if you use high slump concrete, say something like 220 mm slump, we can insert cage up to something like 18 meter depth, I'm sorry. And if you have something like superfluid self-compacting concrete with the superplasticized, a lot of admixtures, then they are found up to 36 meter depth, we can lower the cage actually like that. And normally for vertical loads, we don't need much of reinforcement, because normally we need reinforcement for resist uplift as well as lateral loads. So most of the time, the reinforcement is required for the upper length only. The lower length, even if reinforcement is not there, may not be a big issue. So again, these are the limitations of CFA coils. So suitability, like whenever we have medium to stiff clays, cement sands, weak rocks, like residual soils without boulders. So when we have boulders, like it will be very difficult to advance the auger like that. Then medium dense or dense silty sands. Then rock overlain by stiff or cemented soils. So these are the suitable ground conditions. Again, very soft soils, we have issues like that. Again, loose sands and very clean sands. Again, that augering, this technique is not that suitable. Then highly variable layered soils will have problem, like because the rate of penetration of auger, when it is different in different layers, will have problems actually. Then suppose penetration into very hard rock, like suppose we need a 1 or 2 meter socketing into hard rock, then again this technique will not be suitable. So where very long piles are required, because we have depth limitations, again we have limitations regarding the reinforcement cage actually. Like that. So example, in Cochin, sometimes we need piles of say 50 meter or 60 meter depth, then this technique may not be suitable. See, now what are the advantages? Like one is high speed of installation. The speed comes because of many reasons actually, because like this is a continuous operation. The entire length of augering is pushed into at one stage. Otherwise, normal piling, what happens? We may have to bring up the like a bucket or drilling tool at frequent intervals like that. Then like no need of flushing, bottom cleaning, all these operations, a lot of time is being saved actually. So the very main advantage is the high speed of installation. Then there is no vibrations or sound, there is no impact, etc. Nowadays, this becomes like, especially in urban areas, people will object to vibrations as well as sound. Then no need of casing, drilling fluids, no need of bentonite circulation, no need of casing, etc. And there is no open excavation. See, always, even when the auger is advancing, the soil is there, and when the auger is withdrawn, it is immediately being filled with concrete. So there is no stress release or like heaving of the soils, which loosens the soil like that. Then piles can be installed adjacent to exit building because there is no vibration like that. Then batter piles possible. See, normally board piles with other techniques, we can only install vertical piles, but with this, even some batter piles are possible. So which is of advantage when we have to resist lateral loads. And limitations, in some ground conditions, it is not suitable, especially like if it is a clean sand, a loose sand, or very soft clay, or if you want to soak it in rock, etc. Then there are depth diameter limitations actually, like a very large diameter or a very long pile, this is not suitable. It's difficult to drill into hard rock. Then concrete has to be readily available because as soon as we finish drilling, we have to remove the auger and start concreting. Otherwise, we'll have problems. So continuous supply of concrete is very, very important. So if there are any interruptions, maybe that pile has to be abandoned. Then the length of cage limitations, because the reinforcement cage has to be installed through the concrete, there are length limitations. And normally, the main advantage is speed actually. So it is economical only when there are a large number of piles and you need very high speed. For a small sites, using this does not make much sense. Then world over, like something like 23% of total piling is CFA piles. In India, very limited use so far actually. But there is the T Foundation Institute, they have done a demonstration project. So slowly, it is hoped this technique will catch up. Another application is pile-based post-grouting. So, like, because in India we use a lot of board piles, so there are some issues with board piles. And like one is the strain incompatibility between skin friction and end bearing, because we know in the pile capacity there are two components. One is skin friction, which is resistance offered by the sides of the pile. Then end bearing, that means resistance offered by the bottom of the pile. So see, normally from experience we know that ultimate skin friction is mobilized at a displacement of 0.5 to 1% of pile diameter. That means at a small displacement of the pile, this is mobilized, fully mobilized. But the ultimate end bearing resistance is mobilized at a large displacement, somewhere like 10 to 15% of the pile diameter only, the ultimate mobilizing. So even though the ultimate end bearing resistance is large, because we cannot allow that much displacement. So normally we are able to use only a small portion of the ultimate end bearing resistance. So this is true for both driven as well as board piles. Then these two are specific to board piles actually. So when you do the boring, the bottom of the pile toe, the soil below the pile toe undergoes some disturbance. See, normally in the case of board piles, we are creating an excavation, except for the for a CFA piles, because normally an open excavation is created by augering or drilling. Then it is filled with concrete actually. So when you do an excavation, what we are releasing the stress actually. So the soil at the bottom tends to heave. So when the soil heaves, it loses its strength and stiffness actually. Then in many cases, there will be upward flow of groundwater, because sometimes what happens, actually the water level inside the bore has to be kept at a higher level than the groundwater table. But sometimes what happens, when the water level is low, the groundwater flows upward. Or sometimes what happens, when you withdraw the drilling tools, that means when you're bringing them the auger or drilling bucket, there is a surge actually. So the groundwater may flow upwards. So in that process, the soil will get disturbed, especially if it is a sandy soil like that. Then there are other, like due to poor construction practices, like because sometimes after drilling, we are supposed to clean the borehole bottom by flushing or with a cleaning bucket or other tools. But sometimes because of poor quality control, this is ignored. So loose soil is left at the bottom of the bore actually. Then sometimes soils may fall from the side of the bore actually. So if or there is no casing, or if our bentonite slurries of inadequate density, soil may fall from the sides, or sometimes when lowering the reinforcement cage or lowering the tremie pipe, etc., some soil may fall like that. Then soil may settle from the drilling slurry, because slurry also carries a lot of soil particles. So if there is too much soil content in that, it may settle. Then some slurry may itself be left at the bottom like that. See, all this contribute to what is known as a soft toe actually. So the toe of the pile, the ground at the toe becomes weak actually. So this will reduce the end-bearing resistance, and like that means when you test the pile, you'll find the settlement is much more like that. So the pile-based grouting, post-grouting is one of the technique to overcome these problems actually. So this is basically after the first the pile is constructed, the concrete is put, the concrete hardens, then we do pressure grouting at the bottom of the pile actually after the concrete is hardened actually. So basically it has two purposes. One is it makes the load settlement response more stiff. That means it reduces the pile settlement. That means pile is able to mobilize higher load capacity at a lower settlement. Then we can also increase the ultimate load capacity and save working load on the pile. So the concept is here, like see, normally what we do, like we do the boring actually. Then the reinforcement cage is there. At the bottom, there is a grouting arrangement. This is lowered into the bore. Then concreting is done. Then we wait for the concrete to harden actually. Then already here certain tubes are there through which grout can go. Then through these tubes, the grout is pumped under pressure to the bottom actually like that. So this is the basic concept actually. So again, there are different arrangements. One is using a flat jack actually. So this is like an impervious sort of membrane type of that at the bottom. So inside, through which the grout tubes are there actually. So through this, and here there is a steel plate and below a membrane kind of that. So when grout is under pressure, this sort of membrane, it expands actually. So here there is no, it is called a closed system because there is no direct contact between the grout and surrounding soil. So the grout is confined within this membrane, but under pressure, the membrane expands, swells like that. So it applies pressure against the ground in this region. There is another system which is called open system. So here, like there are some grout tubes. So there are sleeves are there through which openings. So here what happens? The grout, there is contact. The grout can penetrate into the ground actually. It is called an open system. Like, so here is a steel plate. Below these tubes are there. Here the grout will be pumped through these tubes, and through openings it can penetrate into the ground. Also, it will apply pressure against the ground actually. So grout particles can penetrate the ground provided if it is a cement grout, the cement particles are smaller than the voids of the soil. It can penetrate into the soil. Otherwise, it will be like a compaction grouting. It applies pressure. So this shows the grout pump, and normally it is from the top like this tubes. It goes through the pile, and grout from the top it is pumped and it goes to the bottom. So normally, like a neat cement grouter mix is used. Grout pressures up to 5,000 kPa are achievable, provided skin friction is adequate. And where sufficient grout pressure cannot be mobilized, sometimes what happens in the open system, if the sand is very pervious, then a lot of grout may penetrate into the ground. So the pressure cannot build up actually. So in that case, we can sort of a grouting will be done in stages, because first we'll grout something, then we wait for the grout to solidify. After that, again grout like that. So slowly the pressure can be built up. So now what happens? This shows the hardened pile. Then after the pile is hardened, we grout at the bottom like that. So when you grout at the bottom, there is pressure against upward pressure against the pile actually. So the pile tends to be lifted. So this is resisted by the skin friction. See now the friction act, it is acting downwards actually, because pile is the load, upward load is applied at the bottom, which tends to lift the pile, which is resisted by the skin friction like that. Then once the grouting is finished, the grout sets. Sometimes what happens, there is some relaxation. That means there is at the bottom also there is a pressure, side also there is a frictional resistance are there, shear stresses are mobilized. So this will slightly reduce actually. So this is a relaxation. Then the actual loads are applied, which is when the downward loads are applied. So now what happens? The pile mobilizes additional base resistance, plus now the shear stress has to reverse actually, because the loads are downwards, so the shear stress has become upward like that. So this is the way the stress transfer works like that. See now, how does the pile capacity improve? Like there are 4 mechanisms have been proposed. See, one is like a preloading effect, like during grouting like that. Then when the grout compacts the ground below the pile tip, as well as if the grout penetrates also, there is a improvement of ground actually. Then sometimes what happens, the tip of the pile is somewhat enlarged because of the grouting. Like we are familiar with underbeam piles where the base is enlarged. Something similar. It may not be much, but there could be a slight enlargement of the pile. Then during grouting, some grout may travel upward also around the pile shaft actually. So that will also contribute to the improvement. So this again shows how the like this is the pile during grouting actually. When you grout, tip resistance is mobilized. Similarly, side resistance also mobilized, which is downward actually, because now the grout pressure is trying to push the pile upward actually. Then after some time, these stresses somewhat relax. It may somewhat reduce actually. Then when you apply the load, again additional load is mobilized at the bottom and additional skin friction is mobilized, which is acts upward actually. So if you look at the mobilization of the resistance, for the ungrouted pile, this is the load displacement. So both are shown. There are 2 components. One is the side friction. This is like that, which is mobilized at a small displacement. This is the y-axis is the displacement, x-axis is the load actually. So as the displacement increases, skin friction increases, it reaches a maximum, then remains constant like that. But whereas the bottom resistance, end-bearing resistance, it continues to increase, but it requires much more displacement actually. So this is when the load acts downward. If the load acts upward, again, this is a side friction. But when the load is, in the case of uplift, the end-bearing component is not there, only the side friction is there like that. So this shows in the case of a grouted pile, normally during post-grouting what happens, because of the grout pressure, the pile is slightly pushed upward actually. Because of that, around the side, skin friction will be mobilized, and this acts downward. So it will be along this curve actually. It will come up to, depending on the displacement, this will be mobilized. Just come up to this much point. Similarly, the grout pressure will push the soil downward here like that. So it will undergo some settlement. Some end-bearing resistance also will be mobilized like that. It will be like that. Then after that, there will be some relaxation. The pumping is stopped, the grout sets. In that process, there will be slight unloading actually. So it slightly reduces. Similarly, here also slight unloading. Then when you apply the load, when you apply the actual structural load, the skin friction start mobilizing from here like that. Whereas the end bearing will start mobilizing from here like that. So when you add both, in the case when you add up both skin friction as well as end bearing, for the uncrowded part, it will be like that actually. Whereas for the post-grouted shaft, it will be like this. So remember, like So already, even at small displacements, the earlier mobilized, the bearing resistance already there like that. So it is like a preloading effect. So that is why the first component actually. But the ultimate capacity more or less same actually now. With this mechanism, only it becomes stiffer like that, because some base resistance has been mobilized at an earlier stage. Then second component of improvement is due to improvement of the ground, because due to the ground pressure, there is densification. In the case of both closed and open system, so in case of any loose deposits, it gets compacted like that. Then in the case of open system, the grout may penetrate into the voids of the soil. Then when the grout solidifies, it will have a lot of cohesion actually. So the shear strength of the soil will get improved. So it will contribute to both ultimate end bearing resistance as well as a stiffer low displacement curve actually. So the ultimate capacity can also be improved because of these mechanisms. Then another is the tip could be slightly enlarged. So when you have more area, we get more end bearing resistance. Similarly, some of the grout may travel up actually around the shaft actually. So improving the shaft resistance also. So with all these mechanisms, we are able to get much higher capacity. Now coming to the design methods, like see normally normal piles, we have this equation like the ultimate capacity is base resistance plus side resistance or skin friction. So here we have different approach. Like one is we assume the side friction remains same, but the base capacity improved. So we multiply the normal base capacity with a factor like a tip capacity multiplier factor, which is based on experience and from factors and which is related to the grout pressure actually. So the higher grout pressure which can sustain, we can have higher capacity like that. Sometimes axial capacity multiplier, that means the capacity of the normal pile into a factor like that. Or sometimes each component cell like separate multiplier factor. So these are all empirical approaches. So normally people do this base grouting, they do load test, then evaluate the improvement, and from that experience they recommend these factors like that. Now coming to the load test. So in the case of piles, we have to conduct this load test. Which could be initial load test or routine load test on working piles like that. So we have basic different ways. One is static load test. So we can have with the reaction loading, which most of us are familiar with cartilage, or we can have reaction loading with anchor piles or rock anchors. And there is a new technique which is called the bidirectional load test. So these three are different versions of static load test. Then we have something known as rapid loading test or quasi-static loading test. Then third category is dynamic load test. So in the rapid loading, I will just briefly explain two methods. One is stat dynamic and one is stat rapid. So if you look at the pile load test methods, see one is static. So here we are applying a dead weight actually. So we have to apply 100% of the test load. And we measure the load and displacement. And from that, we can directly get the load capacity. In the dynamic load test, we have a mass which is like 1 to 2% of the test load. And we drop it from a height onto the pile. Then we measure the acceleration, strains in the pile. Then there is a sophisticated analysis or a wave equation analysis. And from that, we have to get the pile capacity. The rapid load testing is something in between actually. So here also we can have two methods. The stat dynamic, what we do, like we keep a weight on the pile, and which could be 5 to 10% of the test load actually. Then we, using an explosion, we try to propel this weight up actually. So at that time, there is a force like a mass into acceleration. So that much reaction will act as a load on the pile like that. Then once it is propelled, it will be caught by a mechanism before it again drops back into the pile like that. So this is something similar to that. Like here, we create a static load, then with a jack, apply a reaction like that. But here it's sort of a dynamic reaction, we can call it like that. But in this stat rapid test, this is something like this actually. A mass is dropped onto the pile, but then we have a cushioning arrangement, like a spring system, which sort of reduces the impact actually, which softens the blow. But again, like a force is equal to mass into acceleration is applied onto the pile actually. So again, this slide explains what is the difference. Like this shows the time, x-axis shows the time, y-axis it shows the magnitude of the load. So in the case of dynamic load test, the load actually a very short time actually. Because it's an impact, the load falls from a height, it impacts the pile, so there is a pulse like that. Then immediately after that, it becomes zero like that. The impact force becomes zero like that. Whereas in the case of rapid loading test, again similar. So there is the force acts for a longer time. That is the idea like that. So again, we can see that in the dynamic load test, this shows the stresses actually. Along the depth, stresses vary actually like that. Because normally what happens when the weight falls at the top of the pile, so the stress travels as a wave actually. Initially, the top is under compression, then slowly that wave travels down like that. Similarly, velocity also like that. The displacement is also like that actually, because top displaces first. At the time, the bottom displacement is zero. Slowly, that that travels down because there's basically a wave propagation. But in the case of rapid loading test, if you look at the load acts for a longer time actually. So if you look at the stresses, it is more or less throughout the pile, the stresses are there. So that means the pile behaves as more or less like a rigid material. Then the velocity is also more or less uniform across the pile. The displacement is also more or less uniform like that. If you look at the static load test, actually here the duration is very long actually. Load is maintained for a long time. So stresses act throughout the depth of the pile. The velocity is zero. Displacement at the top it will be slightly more, bottom it will be slightly less like that. So this again shows what is the difference. Like again, x-axis is the time, y-axis is the force of the pile. So in the case of dynamic load test, the force acts like the force suddenly shoots up and immediately becomes zero like that. It acts for a very short time. That means TL. That means the time during which the load acts. So for the DLT, this is the TL. Like that means the time of loading. This is something like 5 to 10 milliseconds. Then for the rapid loading test, the load increases, reaches a peak, and then reduces actually. So this will happen something like 50 to 100 milliseconds. Whereas in the case of static load test, the duration may be hours, or sometimes even we keep it up to something like 24 hours like that. Then normally in the case of in the impact load test, what happens when actually we are dropping a weight, when it impacts the pile, a stress wave travels actually. A compression travels, then comes here and again reflected actually. So the velocity of wave propagation is c, which depends upon the density and the modulus of elasticity, which is something like 3,000 to 4,000 like meters per second for good quality concrete actually. Then the travel time for that wave is how much? 2L by c. That means L is the length of the pile, so the pulse has to travel up to the bottom, then return. So the distance traveled is 2L, and the velocity of wave propagation is c. So the travel time will be 2L by c. So the relative loading duration is the duration of the load divided by this travel time, RT. So if the relative loading duration is less than 5, it will be a dynamic load test. So that means there will be a dynamic effect, and we have to consider the pile will not act as a rigid. So we have to consider the stress wave propagation effect. So we have to analyze that. So if RT is between 10 and 1000. It is called a rapid load test, and it's called a quasi-static load test. So pile almost behaves as a rigid. So there is no dynamic effect, but some acceleration will be there. Pile will have some acceleration, but there is no wave propagation. And if it is more than 1000, we consider it as a static load test. So these are the basic concepts between difference between the two. Coming to static load test, we are familiar like that. So like here we have to have this kennelage, which can be filled with sandbags. It is supported on a platform. Then we put the jack between the kennelage and the pile actually. So the jack, like when you apply the pressure, this supplies the reaction actually. So the weight of the kennelage has to be something like at least 20% more than the test load, so that the kennelage will not lift up during apply. We can also use slightly better arrangement like concrete blocks or other weights can be used. Another is like we can use a anchor piles or rock anchors. Like we can post-tensioned rock anchors. Like it will be drill holes into the rock, insert high strength tendons and grout it like that. Then this can be like tensioned and clamped to these beams actually like that. So wherever rock is available to relatively short depth, we can do that. We can also do reaction piles, like with a lot of, when you need a very high capacity, we need more rock anchors. This type of arrangement is possible actually. So this is a 5,700 ton capacity like that. So this has several limitations, like and advantages also. Like advantages is, one is simple equipment actually. We are all familiar and we have a lot of experience using that. More expertise is available, and the interpretation is very, very simple. Like we don't need any sophisticated software like that. So simple and direct interpretation. So it is considered to be more reliable with that. But it has some limitations also, because the required reaction is something like 120% of the test load. So wherever we need very high capacity piles, arranging this kennelage or reaction through ground anchors could be difficult. Then it takes too much time in arranging the test setup. Then safety issues, especially with kennelage, like a kennelage may collapse, so many things could go wrong. And wherever the ground is soft, like especially in Cochin area, we know in case of marine clays, the ground is very, very soft. To put a very heavy kennelage on the ground, again, it becomes problems actually. Sometimes we have to do ground improvement for that. Then interaction between the loads imposed by the, because the pile is also, we are loading the pile, but due to the kennelage or reaction also stresses are induced. So interaction between these two could induce some errors actually. And many times these are very costly. So these are the limitations of this. So there is another type of bidirectional test which is called the Osterberg cell. So here the concept is, so we have the pile. So see, normally the conventional the reaction is at the top and jack is at the top of the pile. Like so, instead of that, we use the skin friction of the pile as the reaction, and we apply the pressure like the pile is bored. Then this jack setup along with the reinforcement cage is inserted. Then the pile is concreted. Then we wait till the concrete hardens. Pressure can be applied, hydraulic pressure can be applied. So the ram moves up as well as down actually. So the upper part pushes this pile upward and the bottom part pushes this downward like that. So there is there is no need of any kennelage or anchor piles. That is the main advantage actually. So this shows the Osterberg cell, which is like a hydraulic jack, like a specially designed sacrificial jack-like device. See, normally once it is tested, this is gone because this is within the pile. We cannot recover it like that. Then it is designed to be frictionless. Then it is attached to the reinforcement cage for lowering into the pile actually. If in case reinforcement is not there, there will be a separate supporting structure like that. Then it is lowered into the pile. Then when pressurized, top plate moves up and bottom plate down. These plates are actually welded. This will be, the jack is brought to the side and plate will be welded at the side like that. And the load will be determined from the load versus pressure calibration curve. Actually, there is no load cell as such, but once we know the pressure, and it is designed to be frictionless, once you know the pressure and the area, it can be calibrated. We can get the load actually. And the displacement will be using telltales and transducers. We can see this, like there will be a empty tube and probably a rod going through that. So this is like a telltale. Also, we can see this transducer, like displacement transducer, that also will give the movements. Again, at the top, pile movements can be measured using very accurate surveying techniques or other techniques like that. You can see the hose for pumping the pressure like that. This shows like the ocell and top and bottom plates. This shows the ocell attached to the reinforcement cage, and which will be lowered into the pile board, and concreting will be done actually. Then single cells, like the diameter up to 220 mm to 870 mm diameter is available. Load capacity from 90 tons to 2,700 tons. But if you need more capacity, we can use multiple cells like that. Like we can arrange this like that for a very large diameter pile. Like we can have more than one cells. And if we compare the conventional static load test versus ocell, like see, normally conventional, we have the reaction system either with Kennelage or anchor piles. Then we put the jack here and it pushes up against the reaction system, and a download load is applied here, which is being resisted by skin friction and end bearing. So we get the total capacity is F plus Q like that. So in the case of ocell, suppose we are putting the ocell at the bottom of the pile. So like the friction during the test, the friction will act downward and the end bearing will act upward like that. So the jack will apply a force upward, which is P, which is resisting by this friction, and it applies a downward force P, which is resisted by the end bearing like that. So always this is equal. Like, so normally we should put up the cell at the point where both are balanced, that skin friction and base resistance are balanced. Or it could be towards the bottom, need not be exactly at the bottom, it can be here also like that. So the ultimate load capacity is 2 times P. That is the formula. So that means we are applying half the load capacity. That is another advantage of this test. Whereas in the case of this, we have to apply the full pile capacity as the load actually. Whereas here we have to only apply half the pile capacity of the load. Then typical result will be like this. This is the load and y-axis is the displacement. So this shows the upward movement and the development of skin friction. So we can see the skin friction is mobilized and quickly it becomes the fully mobilized like that. Whereas the base resistance, it requires a large displacement to mobilize the base resistance. So when you add up both, we will get the total capacity at that displacement. Like typical test, like this shows the skin friction. And if the pile base is firm, like we get something like that. So this shows another case where the pile bottom was not cleaned properly. So there is some loose material at the pile bottom. So here we can see a lot of displacement, but pile capacity is not being mobilized. So after considerable displacement only, the end bearing resistance is being mobilized actually. So one advantage is we can get both, like skin friction and end bearing is measured separately, so we can understand what is going on. Then from that we add up both, like the skin friction as well as end bearing for the corresponding displacement. We add up both, we get the top loading curve. We may have to adjust for the elastic compression of the pile. We have to do some slight adjustment. So this is sort of interpreted actually like that. Whereas in the conventional static, we get this load directly. Like, but here some interpretation is required. So this was for the pile with a soft toe where it was not cleaned properly. So initially, the entire load was being taken by the skin friction. After that, the skin friction is fully mobilized. Load is coming to the bottom. So here, the pile bottom is very soft. So a lot of displacement actually. Like that. Then once the discs get compacted, then again the load starts picking up like that. So sometimes what happens, if the skin friction is not adequate, then our load capacity becomes limited actually. So then we can also go for external reaction frame. That means we can combine ourselves with this reaction arrangement also. So some of the world records actually, we can see the highest is 36,000 tons actually. Imagine a single pile, but it will be something like a 3-meter dia pile actually, like that. The test load, the capacity like that. Similarly, other capacities also remain like that. So huge capacities are possible, like that, possible. Then advantages like no need of reaction arrangement. Then you can get very high test loads. Then the apply load is only 50% of the pile capacity. Like that means because half is taken by skin friction, half by end bearing like that. So when we add up both, we get the total pile capacity. Then we get separate measurement of skin friction and end bearing. So we have a better understanding of the pile behavior. Then safety is very safe actually. Then accuracy, because there is no loading from the Kenlage or pile reaction. So the results are much more accurate. Speed and economy is also there. Then coming to the limitations, test on pre-selected pile, because this arrangement has to be installed within the pile. So the test pile has to be selected in advance. Whereas in the case of conventional, we can select the pile at random like that. Then the test load limited by weaker or maximum skin friction or end bearing. So this is the limitation actually. Then the top of the pile is not structurally tested. Then top load displacement curve must be interpreted, because we get two separate curves, one for skin friction and one for end bearing. So this has to be combined to generate the top-down load displacement curve like that. And again, this can be used for working piles also, because after the test is over, then we can, that part can be grouted actually. So there is no issue. So after testing, the pile can be used in the working pile also. Then rapid load testing. So we have two types actually. One is StatNamic and StatRapid. So in the case of StatNamic test, we have a weight which is sitting on the pile, and the weight is something like 5 to 10% of the test load actually. So then initially the weight is sitting on the pile, then sort of an explosion is created, and this weight is projected upwards actually. So in that process, it gets accelerated. So there is an equivalent or opposite reaction will apply on this pile. The force is equal to mass into acceleration. Then before this drops back, this will be caught by some arrangement actually. So the force is equal to mass into acceleration. So acceleration is typically 10 to 20 times g. So that is why we need only 5 to 10% of the test load. In the case of StatRapid, a slightly different concept. So here a weight is dropped. The weight is something like 5 to 10% of the test load. It is dropped onto the pile, but in between there is a spring system. Like, so it reduces the impact. And normally what happens, it increases the duration of the test. Earlier I explained one of the criteria is the duration of the test has to be a certain minimum. Otherwise, we'll have dynamic effects actually. So with this properly designed spring system, like we are ensuring we are changing the dynamic load transmission behavior. So increasing the duration of the acting of the load, and we are achieving this quasi-static effect. So this shows dynamic. Like initially we have this weight arrangement. It is sitting on top of the pile. So this A is the pile. So this is the load cell. Of that we have like this arrangement. Like then by burning fuel, a sort of an explosion is created, and the weight is thrown upwards actually. So in that process, the force is equal to mass into acceleration, that effect is created. Pile is loaded, and there is a mechanism to catch this weight actually. Then after that, the weight again can be lowered and again test repeated like that for repeated loading test like that. So this there is an explosion. That's what we are saying this effect. Then stat rapid, again similar arrangement, but then the load is dropped, and here we can see the damping arrangement, the spring type arrangement. So this has to be properly designed, the stiffness, etc., so that the required loading duration is achieved. So the interpretation of rapid load test, see, this is the force measured during the rapid load test. So there will be an inertia of the pile, there is no stress wave effect, but the pile is also accelerated. So the mass of the pile into acceleration of the pile, that much inertia component will be there. Then there will be the static soil resistance. That means the end-bearing resistance plus the side friction, that will, plus there will be some dynamic soil resistance. So this is due to, in case of coarse grain soils like sands and gravel, this will be due to some pore pressure effect. In case of clay, there will be some viscous effect also like that. So this comes because our loading duration compared to the conventional static load test, the loading duration is much less. So we know soils when loaded fast, there is a viscous resistance or there is a pore pressure. So this has to be reduced actually. So the static soil resistance which we want is equal to F rapid. From that we have to reduce the inertia effect of the pile, and we have to reduce the dynamic resistance of the soil. Then we can calculate. So it requires some interpretation, so which is complex than the static load test, but simpler than the dynamic load test. That is the idea of this rapid load test. Then coming to the high strain dynamic load test. So here there is a load which falls from a certain height, but then there is no cushioning arrangement. Actually, it falls directly to the pile top. Pile top may have a steel plate or something, that's all, but it's a rigid like that. So there will be a dynamic effect. It travels, the impact travels as a stress wave, and we have to do the wave propagation analysis to get the equivalent static load capacity. And we'll be measuring the acceleration, like strain gauges, accelerometers will be attached to the pile, and which will be measured, and there is a signal matching technique to arrive at the load capacity. So if you just compare like static load test, interpretation is very easy. That is the main advantage like that. But cost, time, safety, capacity, all these are issues. Coming to rapid load test, the interpretation is more difficult than static load test, but it is easier than dynamic load test. And it is moderately economic and fast. Whereas dynamic load test, it is very economic and fast, but then interpretation becomes more difficult. Sometimes it's like a black box, like the agency will come and give you a test load as a result, but you will not know what is happening like that. So if the agency is not reliable, we may have a lot of issues with this. So with that, I come to the conclusion. And if we just recapitulate, we just looked at the scope of geotechnical engineering. So nowadays, geotechnical is not only about foundations, retaining structures, slopes, about bearing capacity and settlement. It is much more like that. It touches all areas like of civil engineering, mining, energy, disaster management. Everywhere we need geotechnical engineering services. And we looked at geosynthetics and some of their applications, like reinforced soil, landfills, seashore protection, etc. Then we looked at the continuous flight over technique of boat piles, then the technique of doing post-grouting at the base of boat pile after the concrete is hardened. Then we looked at the various pile load test, conventional static, then the OSCEL, rapid load test, and dynamic load test. So with that, I conclude, and I apologize for the initial hiccups and for I think I have taken much more time. I'm sorry for that, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And in case you want to discuss something, you're free to contact me also. My email, phone number is also given. Once again, I thank you.